Hello, and welcome to our second 2025 Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA Beyond Accounting online presentation. I'm David Powell of Chartered Accountants Worldwide Network USA, and for today's event we are focusing on leadership. Our first session is a series of 4 presentations that run for about 60 minutes. The first one will be about 20 minutes, followed by a 2-part second presentation of about 30 minutes and a final one of about 10 minutes. We will then transition to a second session where our presenters will discuss the topics presented as well as any audience Q&A. Total time, including this introduction, of 90 minutes. In joining this event, you will have been prompted to sign in to Slido, which is an app we are using to do Q&A and polls. We will also use details of those who sign in to send out digital badges you can add to your LinkedIn profile if you so choose. You can also reference the badge in attending this event as part of your own CPD activity. You will also see a control panel located at the top right of your screen if you're on a laptop, or at the bottom of the screen if on a mobile device. The panel has tabs for Q&A and polls. And you can enter questions under the Q&A tab. And if you see someone ask a question you like, if you like their question, it raises it up the list we're looking at. And in session 2, we will be monitoring this list in deciding which questions to ask our presenters. We also have copies of the slides being presented today available for download underneath the screen that is playing this webinar. During the event, we will be asking 5 polling questions and we'll give you about 20 seconds to answer. If you have any issue with answering the polls, log a comment under Q&A so we can timestamp your participation. For those of you that are US CPAs and have requested CPE credits, answering the polling questions is a requirement to evidence you have attended the event. At the end of the event, you will also receive a short survey, and please complete it because we appreciate your feedback and let us know how we do. The learning objectives for today's presentation are that you learn how to manage and successfully navigate new leadership dynamics. Can you move? Thank you, Shane. Setting yourself up for success, not failure, establishing a healthy team leader dynamic, and understanding and leveraging core leadership competencies. Secondly, creating high-performance teams with cross-functional collaboration and partnerships, as well as global multinational cultural content. And finally, mastering assurance leadership concepts to position yourself as a catalyst for positive organizational change. Now, before I introduce our first speaker, let me launch our first poll. Polling question 1 is, culture informs purpose, builds pride and brand. Do you agree, disagree, or don't you know? And so to our first speaker, Brian Jones, based in Pennsylvania. Brian is a retired reinsurance executive with more than 25 years of global leadership experience, including 8 years spent living and working in Zurich, Switzerland. He has held senior leadership roles at GE Insurance Solutions and Swiss Re in the area of operations, claims, strategy, and casualty underwriting. Upon his retirement, Brian started his own coaching and consulting business, Coaching for Executives LLC. Today, he works with individuals at varying points of their leadership journeys, from would-be leaders to seasoned CEOs. He also consults with businesses on topics ranging from process improvement and simplification to organizing vitality, executive team development, as well as strategic growth. Brian is the author of an ebook download titled Your First 100 Days. And now, let's close the poll and share the results. Okay, 100% agree. Thank you very much. And now, Brian, it's over to you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak to everyone around the world. So listen, what I'm going to spend my time speaking about today are these areas of focus for leaders at all levels. It's interesting to me in my coaching practice, whether I'm dealing with people, leaders at a C-suite level, or young leaders who are taking over their first team, a key red thread that everyone experiences, irrespective of their experience, is, my gosh, I'm in charge of this stuff, whatever this stuff is, and there's just too much of it coming at me. I'm overwhelmed by information. I don't know how to set priorities. And actually, because of this, I'm somewhat afraid I'm failing. one of the things that I encourage all leaders to do as they take over a new team or as they're leading their current team is to take some steps to hopefully slow the world down, to hopefully segment the world that they're living in into bite-sized chunks so that they can begin to diagnose where are things going well and where are things not going well. And with this understanding, begin to take actions that help them and their teams prosper. In the end, the takeaway on this slide is really kind of what I'm all about. When I'm coaching people, it's sort of a joke, but it's not really a joke. I ask them, what are the 5 things that will get you fired if not done? Because those are the places to think about spending time to set as priorities. You'll see on this slide some buckets of, I say, rational subgroups of activity or thought that I encourage people to consider, and to consider aligning their activities and their time into these buckets in a very specific way. Now, just reading across the slide, these buckets are team and people, which is probably the most important topic, and I'll spend more time on this later. Customers, and these are both internal and external customers. Understanding the market in which you are operating and your organization is operating. Having some facility with the systems and processes that you're responsible for, because these systems and processes probably have a great deal to do with, first of all, how satisfied your employees are, but probably more importantly here, even how satisfied your customers are with you, your team, and also your organization. Legal and compliance is also a very important area that leaders need to focus on for obvious reasons. And then the capstone, I would say, bucket of activity is really around culture. So let's go through these real quick. Team and people. A fundamental question that as you take over a team, or even as you run your team on a year-to-year basis, is the question, do you have the right people doing the right things in the correct way? Pretty simple statement, but how do you know the answers to those questions? Well, first of all, hopefully you're talking to people in the organization who are giving you an impression of how they perceive your team and the individuals on your team. But hopefully you're also doing your own diagnosis in terms of right people, right things in the right way. When it comes to people, what I encourage new leaders and old leaders to think about is a very clinical, sort of critical view of the people who work for them. And understanding we all have bias and we all have the possibility of favoring people, trying to take a step back, maybe getting some input from other people in the organization about the individuals on your team, and diagnose, what do my people do? So if I'm evaluating them, 2 dimensions, what they do and how they do it. The what people do is really kind of the daily work. So maybe they're responsible for managing a certain number of accounts. Maybe they're responsible for growing sales year over year. Maybe they're responsible for processing a certain number of tasks in a period of time. That's very much the what of that I'm speaking about here. These tend to be activities that are oftentimes found in people's management business objectives, and things that it's pretty objective. Okay, you did it, you didn't do it, you did it well, you didn't do it well. That's really the what. The other dimension that I encourage leaders to consider is how the people on their teams perform their work. So are they a good colleague? Are they adhering to the corporate values? Are they adhering to the culture that you're trying to build in your organization? That's the how. The magic of this is when you can plot your team members on a matrix. It's a 9-blocker. You've probably seen such things where you rate them in terms of the dimensions of what they do and how they do it. And you start asking yourself the question, gosh, who are my top performers? And for my top performers, why do I think they're top? And do other people agree? If I were to calibrate with other leaders who see my team in action, would they largely agree or would they disagree with how I've placed people? Now, once you come into a place where you feel pretty good about where you have people placed, asking yourself the question, for my top performers, what am I doing to keep them engaged? What am I doing to re-recruit them? What am I doing to make sure they feel like there is not only a place today for them, but there's growth opportunity tomorrow? So when we think about team and people, this is such an important role for a leader to have, to take this in their hands and make sure your top performers, your stars, feel like they're stars and feel like there's a future for them. Likewise, on that same matrix, there will be a bottom left-hand quadrant. These are people who are struggling with what they do and how they do it. They're not getting a good rating from you. They're probably not people getting a super good bonus. They're probably people that you need to have a strong look at and ask yourself the question, gosh, what would it take to get this person to move up, to be a better performer? What's in their way? And can I help them get there? Now, this also begs the question, if they've been in that lower left-hand quadrant for year over year for a period of time, there's also a place to ask yourself the question, is it time for us to move on? Is it time for them to find some place where they are better suited? And for me to find some place as a leader to put somebody into that role who can better perform? And this is also raising the topic of delegation and accountability. One of the things I observe as a place where leaders oftentimes struggle, again, when they're so busy, they're trying to take in so much information, so many new things happening around them, they fail to delegate. They take on too much themselves. They don't delegate tasks that could be done by others to others, and they will resist holding people accountable for work being performed. One of the things that really helps a leader set priorities and also focus on the work that they should be doing as a leader, as an executive, is making sure you're clearing your plate as much as you can from that which can be done by others, but you can't do that if the team underneath you is not competent and fit for purpose. So let me move on for team and people in a moment. And then after I get through this slide, I'm going to take you through, especially for team and people and also culture, failure modes. So places where leaders really get it wrong and trip over their own feet. If I move on to customers, here I'm focused on internal and external customers as well. As a leader, it's important to understand what is critical for quality for my customers. What do they care about? And am I delivering that? How am I doing in terms of ease of doing business? Do they like working with my team? Do they like working with my organization? Or am I a pain? Because if I'm a pain, I'm getting to the place where maybe customers are saying to themselves, gosh, I don't want to do business with those knuckleheads anymore. I'm going to take my stuff elsewhere. So very important that leaders understand how the customer perceives you and how you understand what's important to them. Moving on, a related topic is that of market. So oftentimes it's interesting to me, I encounter leaders who lead maybe a back office function or lead something that is not customer touching, customer facing, and they really don't understand the context in which their business is operating, which I think is a big miss. Part of your role as a leader is always interpreting the outside world for your team. So if there are changes in the market, if there are changes in competitor behavior, if there are changes in buyer behavior or customer behavior, being able to understand what those changes are and helping your team understand, hey, look, here's where we fit in. Here's where we need to do some things differently in order to delight our customers, in order to seize new opportunities. That's very much inside the remit of every leader. And even if you're not customer touching, customer facing, you still ought to understand these things. Systems and processes. Where do systems and processes create risk? Where do they delight or irritate customers? Spoke earlier about things that drive customers crazy. Oftentimes, it's the interface. It's the process interface between yourself and them where something is broken, something is not as clean as it could be, there are handoffs that have dropped. There are opportunities likely, as you take on a new role, to think about simplifying, automating, and error-proofing processes so that you get out of your own way and increase the customer satisfaction and hopefully your ability to retain those customers as you move through time. Legal and compliance, I presume everybody on this call is very spun up on the importance of having a culture that pays attention to legal and compliance. It's very important that you set as a leader, and the leaders around you set the tone from the top, as it's often called, so that you are clear with the people who work for you, hey, around here, we care about the law, we care about compliance, and we don't want to find ourselves on the front page of any newspapers because we have anti-money laundering problems or fraud problems or whatever problems. Setting that tone is super important, and a component of that is also ensuring that you have controls that are sufficient and appropriate for the risk that you're trying to manage, and that you as a leader own those controls, and you are helping the staff understand it's important to you, therefore it should be important to them. The last one on this slide is back to culture. And what I want to talk about here with you is the notion of aspirational culture versus lived culture. Aspirational culture is pretty simple, and you guys have all seen it, I'm sure, in your careers. Aspirational culture lives on PowerPoint slides. These are the statements that an organization makes about, we believe in this, we're for that, we're against that. So, we believe our employees are our number one asset. We believe that we should put the customer first. We believe, we believe. Aspirational culture is very important, but what's actually important to understand is what is the distance between what's on those slides and what senior leaders are telling the teams versus how is that culture lived in an organization. So, for example, if you say people are our most important asset around here, well, if your organization or you as a leader don't provide clarity in terms of training opportunities, development opportunities, growth opportunities for your team, people will start to wonder in the back of their minds, are these guys really walking the talk, or are they just telling me a story? It's important, it's really important that you not just tell a story, that you walk the talk. You all agreed, I think, with David's first question about how culture informs purpose and builds pride and brand. It also, by the way, is super important to employee engagement and to employee retention. Two things that pretty much every firm I work with and every firm I'm aware of has some challenges with. So Shane, if we could move on to the next slide, that'd be great. So folks, here, what I'm doing is I'm going through the same basic outline, but I'm going to focus on places where it goes wrong. And I'm going to focus most of my comments on team and people and on culture. You're going to find these to be related topics. And for me, these are the most important on the list in terms of places where when leaders fail here, they actually fail in a pretty big and spectacular way. One of the biggest things that leaders struggle with, again, irrespective of whether they're C-suite or junior leaders, is actually driving accountability for outcomes in their organization. I encounter very senior people every week in my practice who struggle to give clear feedback, who struggle to tell somebody, you know what, that was not your best effort. I know you could do better, and I would like something different from you next time. What they're doing is falling into the trap of being nice to somebody, or they perceive they're being nice, but they're not being clear. Nice is, I'm going to basically kick the can down the road. You're not performing, but I'm not going to tell you because, first of all, it makes me uncomfortable to tell you you're not doing well. And I know it's going to make you uncomfortable, so I'd rather we just push that under the carpet together. That's really an indication of a leader abdicating their responsibility to their team and the broader organization. And what you also do is you really sell out the person that you're speaking to there. They deserve from you as their leader the clear feedback that, you know what, this is not great. You know what, I know you can do better. Because they are not going to change their performance unless you as the leader tell them there's a need to change. And many are the people I coach who have been in their career for a long time. Everything they think is going swimmingly, only to find out when they get a new leader who is actually clear and is not so concerned about kind, they're just being clear and objective, suddenly they don't fit anymore. So this person 5, 10, 20 years into their career suddenly finds there's no longer a place for them. That's really a crappy thing to do, and that's the outcome of leaders over time not doing their job. So it's incorrect, in my view, to not be clear with people. It's incorrect as a leader, an abdication of responsibility to not try to get the best out of your team. It's also incorrect if you try to play favorites. Now, we all have biases. We will all probably tend to favor some people over others. But being aware of those biases, having other people, other peers check you on how you're thinking about the team performance and who your key players are, that's a way to mitigate bias and gets you through the problem, the potential problem of poor processes. So, you need to have calibrations. You should do those 9 blockers I spoke about. You should rack and stack your employees. And as a leader, you should take a step back with some frequency and clear and cold, look at your team, look at performance, and give the feedback necessary to get that team to its next level of performance. And finally, on this one, reward and performance need to be tied together. So there are only so many goodies to go around in terms of training opportunities, in terms of money, in terms of advancement. You should be really focused on ensuring the people who are your star players are getting those things. Now, I'm going to zip through over to culture, and happy to take questions later on these customer market systems and legal. But culture, look, if there's too big a gap between the aspirational culture and the live culture, you're going to breed cynicism and you're going to damage your brand. And again, back to employee retention, you're going to hurt yourself. So paint the picture of where you want the culture to be and actively work to make sure you're closing the gap between how people perceive the firm, how people perceive the culture, and what you're saying the culture is. The only way to do this is to ask people to set an environment where people who are doing the work every day can give you that feedback on, hey, here's how I think about working here. Here's how I think about our culture. Here's Mr. or Mrs. Leader, where I think you could do a better job driving culture. That's the only way to get underneath how the culture is really landing. So with that, David, I think I still got a couple of minutes, but I think I'm going to wrap it up. And thank everybody for their time and their attention. And I look forward to the other presentations and the questions.
Thank you, Brian. And yes, you had a couple more minutes, but we can make that up on the Q&A later. Thank you for that. Now let's launch our polling question number 2, which is, to build a high-performing team, you need to set clear goals and vision. Do you agree, disagree, or don't know? Now let me introduce our second and third speakers. Nikki Mamedova, based in New York. Nikki is a senior finance executive with over 20 years leadership experience at a top-tier Big Four public accounting firms and Fortune 500 companies across the US, UK, Canada, and Asia. She has successfully driven large-scale transformations, scaled finance functions, and delivered strategic financial initiatives for global giants such as Amazon, Royal Bank of Canada, Saks, Deutsche Bank, Citibank, and Carter's. Nikki holds a CPA designation in the US and in Canada, and is a proud alum of Columbia Business School and Kansas State University. Our third presenter is Nancy Chakabuda, based in Indianapolis. Nancy is part of our executive team, serving as vice president. She's also chapter president of our Indianapolis chapter, and is a senior director global leader in Cummins Inc.'s Global Center of Accounting. And she was with Cummins in South Africa before moving to the USA. Prior to that, she was with RSM and was a top 35 under 35 chartered accountant finalist in South Africa in 2020. She won the lead category award. Nancy has strong expertise and a passion for coaching and people development, and she carries out formal and informal mentorships and initiatives to develop talent in and outside her organization, extending her expertise to nonprofits. And now let's close the poll and share the results. And once again, we have 98% of people, or 96%, 98% agreeing. Thank you very much. And with that, let me pass to Nikki.
Thank you for the introduction, David. And I'm definitely excited to be part of the global audience, especially as someone who was born in Europe and now residing in North America. But first, I'd like to talk about building high-performing teams. I think this is a topic that we hear a lot about with frequent questions on LinkedIn. How do you actually do that? But it's not just a corporate jargon. It is a difference between the team which struggles versus the team which thrives. And let me share with you some fundamentals which I saw work based on my own experience. First, set clear goals and vision. I'll tell you, in all my experience in every single company, The team is not successful unless everyone knows how what we're supposed to do linked to the company strategy. If we don't understand what we need to do and why, I mean, even if you are the most successful leader in the world on your own, you're not going to be successful as a team. I always see some of the beautiful and well-written corporate goals, but sometimes the analysts don't really understand what it means. That's why it's important to break it down as a leader and saying, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing this, and this is how it links to the company strategy. The second important point is open communication. And this is where we set the tone as leaders. I've seen the teams where people are afraid to speak up. I also see, although we had a lot of things we could have added value, and I also saw the team where the junior members would share the ideas which could allow us to save some of the unnecessary time spent afterward. That is where it's important for you as a leader to set the right tone. Don't be afraid of people speaking up. Don't be afraid of disagreement, because you want people to speak up. You want them to bring and share different ideas. This is the only way we succeed as a team. I always say, without a team as a leader, I can't really achieve much. The first important point is earn trust. And this is really a currency of the leadership. Trust should be earned, and it should be earned on a consistent basis, especially for new leaders. When you step in the team, just because you're VP or SVP or EVP, that does not mean the team will automatically trust you. That is why you need to be consistent with whatever you're doing. Stay consistent with your promises. Follow up on what you said you're going to do, because the team will notice that. And like I said, it's the most important quality of the leader, because if the team doesn't trust you, you're not going to go far. And it works both ways. You also need to trust your team. If you don't trust your team, well, feel it. And if we feel that you don't trust them, again, you're not going to go far as a team. Avoid favoritism. In every single company I've been to, whether it's Big Four, whether it's SAP, whether it's Amazon or RBC, I could clearly see when people played favorites. And Brian talked about that as well in the slide. Nothing kills performance more than when you play favorites. And our strength as a team comes not because there are people on the team who are like you, and we generally tend to gravitate toward people who either came from the same background or like us. Actually, our strength as a team comes from people who are not like that. And we need to have diversity, because if we have the same people, we are limited in some of their contribution. If you have diverse team and you could encourage people to speak up and contribute their different perspective, this is how we succeed. Next, say thank you. I think a lot of time people underestimate the power of simple thank you. A lot of time people think that it's only bonus, promotion, what drive people. Say simple thank you, and say it not at the end of the project. Say thank you when someone stepped up. When, for example, their colleague was sick or had to take time off. Say thank you when someone volunteered. Say thank you when someone tried to do something that we have never done before, and you will see how much difference it will make. The next important point is being your team advocate. I had an example where people would come to me and say, I give you credit for being the advocate because I could see it. What that means is speak up on behalf of your team in a performance meeting because it matters. When it comes to the bonus discussion, for example, it matters that you speak up on behalf of your team. Speak up on behalf of your team when they think the work is inefficient. I'm giving you an example where we had ERP implementation, for example, and your team had to work 50 hours a week or 60 hours a week. It's your responsibility as a leader to advocate on behalf of your team and say, why do we need our people to work 56 hours a day? Let's develop a more realistic timeline. The next one is create an opportunity for growth. At every organization I was in, we had employee survey. And one of the common concern, I would say, or item coming up through employee survey at Amazon, for example, is give me opportunities for growth, whatever that means. Whether giving me ownership, something to own, or giving me additional training, and etc. What you need to do as a leader, you need to know what makes your individual team members tick, where we're going. What's the aspiration? Maybe we don't even want to be in finance or accounting. Maybe we want to be in operation. So it's your responsibility as a leader to understand what drives them, where we want to go, and for you to create opportunities. Now, a lot of time it's not immediate. You might need to work with HR. You may need to work with your fellow executive to do that. But if you show that you're willing to do that, the team is going to see that. And the last one I want to talk about is micromanaging. It's an absolutely no of leadership. Don't ever micromanage, because micromanaging signals two things. One, you don't trust the team. And if you don't trust your team, the team is not going to trust you. And you're not going to get the best performance. And the second one, believe me or not, micromanaging signals insecurity. A lot of time, it's not because you're concerned about the performance of the team and your team is not performing. It's because you're either insecure or you're inexperienced. So this is something that I want to tell specifically to new leaders and new managers. Where is a fine line between being hands-on and understanding what's going on with the team versus being a micromanager. So get in, understand the process, explain to them, when step back. Have one-on-ones, do constant checking, but please do not every second send an email or ask your team, how's it going? Let them handle it. Have trust that we will handle it. So now we're going to be talking about the next topic, strategies for effective cross-functional collaboration. I am sure everyone who is on this call is working with our teams. And when I mean it with our teams, it's either the teams in operations or the team in technology or some other teams within accounting and finance. And I'm sure you've seen the situation when things go wrong. For example, finance is waiting on legal is waiting on tech is waiting on operations. So we all been through a situation where the project just don't work. And let me tell you, let me share with you some of the practices which I definitely know work, because I am working with our team on a daily basis, and I know what works and what does not work. So this is based on my own experience. Align around shared goals, not just function. A lot of time what I've seen is that each team has their own KPI to achieve. For example, financial close. A lot of controllers would say, I need to close my book within 5 days. This is how I'm going to be evaluated. And because of that, we need information from another team. Now, one thing that you need to be very clear about, like, what is it that you need from the team? But the second thing, what you need to understand that our team has their own priorities. So instead of me and you, it needs to become us. So instead of saying, I need to close the book within 5 days and that's when you need to provide it, you say, if you provide this information, we together will be able to provide better leadership insight to our executive team. When it becomes a team, it's a shared goal, even if functionally you're part of different teams. Clarify roles and interdependencies early. I see that a lot when we work with our team, for example, implementation projects. It was a project management team, and we all sit in a room. For example, I'll just give you an example. We need to be very clear, what is everyone doing? What are you doing versus our team is doing? Where's the hands off? What are the deliverables? What is the timeline? And as a leader, a lot of time finance, for example, leads some of the major finance transformation projects. You need to be very clear what you expecting from our teams, because like I said, it might be the top priority for finance, but it may not be the top priority for everyone else. Build mutual accountability across the team and leads with trust and transparency. This is kind of go along together. A lot of time what I find that on a major project, for example, on a kind of daily interaction, each team works in silence. This is very common, especially in a large organization, and we depend on another team all the time. We never work in reality. It seems like we work in silo, but one team always depends on another. So it's always important to be, first of all, understanding when someone is asked to do something for your team and they cannot deliver, what you need to ask them, help me to help you. Is it something I could help you to deliver? And the second one, be very transparent and open about the risk. One thing which I always hate when it becomes finger pointing at the end of the project, because it's highly political and people don't communicate. Is it our responsibility as leaders to work collaboratively? And I'm going to lead it to the next topic, and make sure we're transparent, we communicate, we ask about what's the risk, what's the blockers, because that will serve everyone right in the long run. This is how we're going to be successful. Collaborate, don't compete. Like I said at the beginning, a lot of time different teams have different KPIs. And we always, and sometimes this is actually becoming very important for the IT team, for example, to say, you know what, I achieved this within 3 months or 4 months. And they don't care what really finance think. Like I said, I have never seen the situation where competition is going to get you to success. As leaders, we always need to say, we are in it together. We win together, but if we separate, we fail. I've never seen, again, the situation where someone would go on their own and compete and think their priority is the most important and the team wins. It's always 99% it fails. That is why I always remember that. collaborate, celebrate joint wins, and share credit. I remember that when in February, I worked very closely with the executive and the legal team and the third parties. We had to close a multi-million-dollar contract. And even if my team obviously led it, but those executives were very important to get us to the finish line. Every time we would hit the major milestone, I would say thank you, because it wasn't just my team win, but it's also legal win, third party risk win, and procurement win. Believe me, you build relationship if you thank people for that. People would not necessarily remember how difficult the project is, but we will remember how you made them feel. So now I'm going to talk about our next topic, navigating internal politics and internal networking. When I was going to school, both in Europe and North America, I learned accounting and finance. And I wish I was taught some lessons on internal politics and internal networking. This is a topic where we wish we would teach us at school. When I was growing up, I was always taught that if you work hard, everyone is going to notice that. Well, let me tell you something that probably many of you know. How well you succeed in business, a lot of time has very little to do how smart you are and how hard you work. It's about what connection you have, what project you're on, and how visible you are. It also depends on the company dynamic. So when you come to the company, especially when you're new, one thing that you need to do, you need to observe and understand where your company power plays. So this is not just the CFO, SVP, or VP. There are some silent influences. Yes, I know I said it's not great to play favorite, but sometimes there are favorites of your boss which could influence them. What you need to do is understand who they are and try to make allies and friends with them. The second important point, which it goes very closely with the point on networking, build strategic relationship. This is a very small wall. And when I say it's a small wall, I'm saying the wall in general is a very small wall. Let me tell you one thing. I'm spending a lot of time in Canada, and I'm working with people at PwC who I worked with 15 years ago. Because I have good relationship with them, we could continue to do good work. So when you're working and when you're at work, build relationship with everyone. I always say that your work is your biggest network. Like a lot of time people ask me, how do you network strategically? You're on a call with someone, might be another team or your team, build relationship with them. Take them for coffee, say, can you go for lunch? Or if someone invites you for coffee or invites you for lunch, go, because you build relationship. First of all, it's easy to do work when you have friends. And the second of all, you don't know where these people are going to go tomorrow. If we leave, for example, you're going to have a network in other companies, which is always important to have. The third one is read and adapt to your company dynamic. And every company, I'm telling you, every company I've been to is different. Some companies are flat. You could basically walk into the CFO office easily. Some companies with a hierarchy. You cannot go to SVP if you report to VP. In some companies, decisions are made at the top. Or you're the one who could make decisions at individual level. In other companies, it's a highly collaborative. You absolutely have to have two other people and three different levels to go through to make a decision. A lot of mistakes come when people come from other companies and try to operate like we did in other companies. Like in Amazon, for example, a lot of time you could make a decision in some team, and in some teams you actually had like 3 levels of approval. At SAC, I could make a decision as a chief accounting officer, corporate controller. At RBC, it's a bit different. So you're only going to be successful if you read that dynamic and you adapt. That doesn't mean you need to change yourself, don't get me wrong, but you definitely need to modify and adjust your style. And I'm talking about this not just in North America, I'm talking about around the world as well, especially when you move the companies and you move countries, because that style is different as well. Manage conflict diplomatically. This is another quality I wish people would have taught me in school. One thing I'd like you to remember, if anything, I'd like you to remember, never make enemies at work. You don't have to be friends with everyone, but do not make enemies, because I am telling you, this is a small world and you will encounter the same person at a different time, either within the same organization or another organization. So I always look at the corporate world as the ocean. You are in the ocean, and sometimes you see icebergs. So the icebergs, you try to avoid the iceberg. And the final thing is find your sponsor or advocate. It's also very important in the corporate world, find someone who's going to advocate for you, because that's the only way you really succeed. Having someone who is speaking up for you when you're not in the room. So that's everything from me. And now I'm going to pass to Nancy, who's going to talk about cultural leadership in the multinational world. Nancy?
Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you for all those great insights. And so good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to speak to you all today on the topic of cultural leadership and overcoming biases, and to build on to what Nikki and Brian also shared. I'll start off with just sharing one of my favorite quotes on leadership and culture, which is, the culture of an organization is a shadow of its leader, which really just highlights the responsibility and the weight that we carry as leaders to rally different and diverse individuals around similar values and expectations, which of course is not an easy ask or task, with us as leaders also trying to find our stride and balance. Next slide, please. So what is cultural leadership, right? And so for me, to sum up cultural leadership, it is positive and impactful influence. It refers to driving change and commonality in approach towards shared values. I describe it on my slide as the hallmark of global leadership, right? Because it becomes more prevalent as a factor for leaders with global and diverse teams, diverse workforces, in multinational environments, and leaders that are leading across cultures and continents. So when I think about the challenges that I have faced as a global leader that make this an uphill battle, which I'm sure most of you can resonate with, there are 4 key ones that I'd like to draw on that global leaders encounter as they try and shape a team culture. The first one is communication norms differ, right? Naturally. Some cultures prefer, for example, formal over non-formal communication. Some prefer written over oral communication. Some cultures have unspoken and non-verbal communication norms, which all really just complicates effective global leadership. The second one is cultural values and value conflicts. And here we can consider the fact that different cultures have different views of leadership. There are cultures that have what we call a high power distance, where hierarchy is important. And then there are cultures with low power distance, where structures are flatter and there's not much regard to, or importance of hierarchy. The third one, which is probably the most complex that I have had to deal with on my leadership journey, is stereotypes and biases. Because as a global leader, you're dealing with employees with different views and perspectives that have been shaped over a long time, right? Influenced by their upbringings and experiences, and as much as you're dealing with your own views and managing your own biases and perspectives. Then the last one is environment influences, which refers to societal norms and factors that influence behaviors and how employees show up at work. Next slide, please. So considering all these challenges that the global leader faces, there's a need, and there's really just an urgent call to us, all of us as global leaders, right, to rethink management beyond its traditional definition, especially in this era of globalization and this concept of global workforces. There needs to really be a continuous push for cultural leadership as a key competency, which you see on my slide here, and as an enabler actually for successful global leadership. And so if you think of it as a competency, there are two areas or skills that global leaders need to build up to be more effective in building cross-cultural teams. On the left there, you'll see a concept called cultural intelligence. This speaks to leaders intentionally building up intercultural knowledge, right? It's as simple as it sounds. I mentioned earlier that there's some cultures with power, some nuances with power distance across cultures. There are also different conflict management norms. And so understanding cultural and societal norms, and how those shape your team members' behaviors, it really provides a foundation on how you adapt and navigate as a leader. So this brings us to cultural adaptability, a key component of cultural intelligence, which is intentionally putting cultural sensitivity into practice as you seek to build relationships and establish alignment between teams from different cultures. So, for example, this can be something as simple as consciously adjusting your interactions, right, to social structures where hierarchy is important or valued, right? So following due process expected in terms of hierarchical interaction when making decisions as much as possible, where possible. And so you'll see a quote there at the bottom as well, which I also quite was drawn into, that draws that interaction between cultural and emotional intelligence. So cultural intelligence picks up where emotional intelligence leaves off. And these two concepts are distinctly different, right? Emotional intelligence is important, equally important for a leader. It's the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your emotions as a leader and others' emotions. While cultural intelligence extends to action, right? Working actively, adapting to diverse environments, taking those actions that align to the knowledge that you've built up. The second component of cultural leadership, that this competency, is cultural influence. And so what's important to note here is the interdependency between these two, cultural intelligence and cultural influence. Because cultural influence involves leveraging your cultural intelligence, so all the knowledge you've accumulated, to seek and to unlock commonalities and values between your team members, right? It's important to have shared values. I think Nikki mentioned that as well as she was presenting. And those can really help you rally everyone together around a common goal. The other side of building cultural influence is the art of communication. Again, as simple as it sounds, something as simple as adjusting your communication to written, where written communication is preferred over oral communication. That can actually increase your effectiveness as you lead globally. Next slide, please. So what are some of the practical tips that global leaders can apply? I like to look at it in a three-pronged approach that you see on my slide here. So it's invest, it's clarify, and it's exchange. So firstly, on the investment side of things, leaders have to have courage and create the space to invest in training and resources that facilitate cultural awareness in their teams. And as much as building a coherent culture rests on you as a leader, as per my earlier quote, you can't do it alone, right? So you'll need to build those champions in your teams, typically your direct layer, your direct reports, if you've got a large organization, to support you on your journey and to really champion the cultural awareness in your team. And then secondly is clarify. And so this involves having models and guidance, so having some structure around decision making and collaboration in your team that will help foster consistency, transparency to decision making, and it limits the subjectiveness that can often come, with biases and perceptions. I always say with clarity comes the opportunity for accountability. I know Nikki also touched a little bit on clarity, right? So having KPIs linked to the use of some of these models and these inclusive norms that you set within your team, it really helps you to hold your team members accountable to reaching the culture that you aspire to. Lastly, exchange. I really love the concept of cultural exchange. And so what this involves is just creating the space, it can be in your team meetings, to acknowledge and celebrate different cultures, right? While also creating that opportunity for team members to share openly on their cultural history, on their influences. I find that this open sharing, it fosters inclusiveness. It gives employees a sense of belonging for team, and for team members, they feel like they are heard and they people do care about them beyond the work, right? It creates that psychological safety. Next slide, please. So I mentioned before that stereotypes and biases are the most complex to deal with. And again, Nikki and Brian touched upon those as well. And they truly are barriers to effective global leadership. Again, you'll see the quotes. I'm a big fan of quotes, that rings true at the left side there is that leadership bias is the hidden enemy of successful leaders. So we all have biases and assumptions that we come with based on our history, our experiences. And some examples of some of those biases, you'll see some on my slide there, which is affinity biases, which is being more inclined to, naturally we're all inclined to people that are similar to us. Proximity biases, which is being more inclined to people close to us physically. It can be in the same continent as you. And then lastly, confirmation biases, which is, we typically process information in a way that's consistent with or confirms, what we believe to be true based on the perspectives we have. And so some of the ways we can build the bridge across these biases as we manage our teams and as we manage ourselves are, firstly, self-reflection is very important. I cannot stress the importance of self-awareness and intentional role modeling for your teams, right? So those small little intentional practices on embracing different cultures are important, bringing it in your team meetings and role modeling it for your direct reports. And then seeking feedback as well. We probably all don't like feedback, but seeking feedback is important, right? And that can be, a simple practice like having a diverse hiring panel, just so you can check your biases. Self-check your biases is something that Brian also spoke about earlier on. So it's important to bring in multiple perspectives to check yourself. And then asking questions to learn is the third one. I like to use ideation sessions as an example for problem solving with my team members. I lead a global team. I want to hear all the ideas. So when we've got a project and time allowing, I do like to have those ideation sessions to hear all the perspectives. And you never know what you can learn, in terms of best practice from practices like that. And then the next one is providing structured and consistent feedback. Fact-based, being fact-based, for example, as you are doing your employee reviews is important. Again, I know Brian mentioned this, making sure that you're having people check you as you're doing some of your employee evaluations, having those accountability partners is equally important. Then lastly, as I mentioned, inclusiveness as a KPI. I think that is one very important aspect. What does not get measured doesn't get improved. So cascading inclusiveness as a team norm, as an expectation for your culture, and holding people accountable for it is important. And that marks the end of my presentation. I hope this has been useful, and I'll hand over to David.
Thank you, Nancy. And That was very good. I enjoyed that. Let me now ask polling question number 3. Polling question number 3 is: leadership is a journey of continuous learning and adaptation. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or don't you know? And while that poll is running, let me set things up for the final presenter, our final presenter, Shane Rogers. Shane is Operational Risk Leader for Global Risk Solutions with Liberty Mutual Insurance. He is also President of CAW Network USA. Shane is a transformational leader with global experience in investment banking, supporting sales, trading, and capital markets, asset management, and insurance, reinsurance. As an experienced chartered accountant, he has himself managed a highly motivated team of professional accountants and internal auditors in North and South America. He is a proven leader of progressive and agile global internal audit teams who engage with and support management in achieving the business goals while retaining robust internal controls and promoting a controls-orientated culture. And now let's share the results of the poll. And this time we have 99% agreeing. And with that, Shane, let me pass to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, David, for that introduction, and thanks to Brian, Nikki, and Nancy for their presentations thus far. It's been very enlightening, very some terrific content. So my topic with respect to leadership is going to be talking about leadership in assurance teams. Certainly drawing a lot on my internal audit experience, but most of my career was either in internal audit or in public accounting. But more recently, I pivoted into risk management, and then I did spend the time in the middle of my career in actually sales and strategy. So, again, I think from a leadership perspective, my comments, while it might be driven from internal audit standpoint, can be applicable to both, leaders in finance or other assurance functions. So I think the challenge about leading in an insurance function is that, a big part of it is how are we actually delivering value to our stakeholders. And to deliver value, for us, it's not just, sort of punching widgets and doing our job. A lot of it is really about the challenge we bring, right? What challenge? I always think about assurance functions sort of having a slightly different view of the world, asking a lot of questions, maybe not knowing all the answers. I think that's the real power of assurance and assurance teams, is that you have that open mind. You're looking for potential risks. If you find issues, you're also then looking for potential solutions, the sense of bringing optionality to the table. And equally, I can say, even when I was in internal audit, one of the things that probably helped differentiate me as an internal audit leader was that I often brought, that sense of optionality to the table. I didn't see issues as just being people opportunity to get a bad report and have people sort of, receive a sort of a very poor outcome. Immediately, if you find issues, it's then like pivoting to what's the opportunity here to fix things and do things differently. So I think from that perspective, it can be very, very valuable. I would also say, so that challenge is really important, and so the role of us as being sort of change agents, right? So being that sort of change agent in our organization, not just providing, again, the sort of raw commentary, but really caring, right? It's important as an assurance function, whether that's in finance, risk, or internal audit, that we actually care. We want the business to thrive. We want to be very clear about that. It was one of the things I always did in internal audit before an audit. Say, hope we got a great audit. Hope it goes well. I hope if we find stuff that we actually make your business or your function more resilient, we make your business more profitable, that you get good outcomes. So I'm not telling people that you're kind of in their corner up front. It's really, really powerful. And that's where you connect with people. So again, the sense of the relationships is really important, particularly the informal. And so, we'll talk about, in a slide or two, the sort of what and the how. But for me, in assurance, one of the biggest values one of the biggest leadership traits that we can have is to bring the sense of the informal and make the informal activities and connections and relationships support and buttress our actual formal work product and feedbacks, whether that's an audit report, a report to a finance committee, to a risk committee or board, right? So it's all about delivering value, okay? So I came across this quote, I think on the internet a few weeks ago. I think it was on LinkedIn actually. And it made me think, skills make you useful, but behaviors and character make you valuable. And I think there's something in that, they're really, it's sort of the behaviors and the character, how you bring your skills to life, how you actually deliver a message, how you transform your organization, how you become trusted and can share bad news in a good way, right? That behavior, those characters, that character makes you very valuable to your organization, right? So I think about the skills, the what, and sometimes like particularly what we're doing. Again, with AI coming into the frame, the what in many roles, not just assurance roles, but almost every role, the what is becoming more and more outsourced to AI bots. However, the key behaviors, particularly the how we communicate and how we deliver messages and how we behave, that will still largely remain the human element, if you like. So again, I just thought that I just wanted to share that with people. Again, leadership is as much an art as a science, and I think it's probably more art than science, to be honest. I mean, I think you can look at all the textbooks you want and read all the leadership and articles. It's how you put it into practice in your organization and how you make an impact is what measures you, to me, as a leader, right? So again, for assurance functions, leadership is definitely built around trust, and that means being able to share perspective with people. I think sometimes like influence. I often talk about influencing without control, being able to sort of present could be a fairly sticky wicket, some sort of not such a great set of outcomes or testing results or observations, and having management trust that you're going to quickly work through the rawness of the observation and get to, well, how can we fix it? What should we do? What options do we have? How can we avoid this in the future? How do we choose the right words to describe it? That's one of the things I often talk to people in internal audit. Sometimes internal auditors, historically might be they tend to be very perfectionist, and they get very stuck on their words, and yet they don't listen sometimes enough. So I think listening is also a very important part of being an effective leader, particularly in an assurance function, right? So again, the how and the why are super, super important and drive your behaviors. And it's also it's not a one and done situation, right? We're on this sort of as an assurance leader, it's continuous learning, continuous adaptation, and playing back and cross-checking, right? So it's very, very dynamic, and which is kind of interesting because some people think, oh, when you worked in an internal audit function or risk management or compliance function, people think, oh, that's kind of dull, But actually, I always tell people when I worked in internal audit, and I was the head of internal audit for Swiss Re Americas for quite a long time, and also led big parts of their audit function globally as well. Audit was one of the most interesting places in the organization to work because you could see everything, you got to know everybody, and you could build lots of relationships, right? So, just worth reflecting on. I want to talk a little bit, sorry, I've gone up there, just on assurance leadership competency. So I like this picture of the iceberg floating there in the deep ocean. And, the piece above the waterline, I always get my geography wrong, but, I think it's about, roughly 1/7 is above the waterline and 6/7 is below, or give or take. I might be off by a few percentage points. But the way I view this in sort of assurance leadership is that the part above the waterline is the formal part, the what we do, right? The sort of, do you produce audit reports? Do you generate reports and financial statements for your board or your risk committee? What your actual output, your work product. But it's really the piece that's lurking below the water, which is much bigger and, to me, much more important. I view that as being the informal competencies, all those sort of leadership traits, behaviors that really support and extenuate your formal product, right? And again, that's the way I think it's. Sometimes people find this a bit hard to reflect on. They think, oh, I'm just a technical leader. I know my stuff. I know everything about IFRS. I know everything about US GAAP. And, I'm just going to sort of bang through the numbers and produce them. I think you have to take a step back. It's certainly in my career, I've seen many of the people I would view as the best leaders really extenuated the informal as much as the formal. Yes, they knew their stuff technically, but they really knew how to manage people. They knew how to get the best out of people and really sort of drove that home. So again, they really had focused on their behaviors and the sort of competencies that they had. So maybe let's just take a look at that in a little bit more detail. So again, you have the formal assurance and then the sort of competencies beneath. So again, really talking about the sort of formal work product and then all the capabilities. So again, it's all the items in the green, all the circles, like in terms of not just being outside your comfort zone and having self-confidence, but also that sort of empathy and emotional intelligence, that Nancy had touched upon earlier, but also having these things about, having presence when you present. So, if you have an idea, present it well, don't be afraid, have confidence. These are all important aspects of being a leader in insurance. But also sparking conversations. You don't know what you don't know. Well, best way to do that is go out and find out about it. Ask people questions, be very open, right? Feedback. Having that sense of influence without control. One of the best things you could do in an insurance function is have that trusted voice and opinion that you don't know all the answers, but you sort of have a logic and a thought process that can sort of help people get there. So again, I used to think about it more when I used to do a lot of our audits, is sharing insights alongside the audit report, where there might be additional ideas and opportunities for the business to pick up and run with. Didn't have time to sort them, solve all the problems, but gave them a trail of breadcrumbs to think about, mull over, and to value, right? That becomes influence without control. I wasn't asking them to respond. I was just saying, hey, I'm being a good corporate citizen and I'm feeding this back to you. I think there might be something valuable in it. So that's how we positioned ourselves as being catalysts for positive change in the organization. And it was, again, the informal products like insights, calls to action, where you could really sort of generate a discussion on a topic that would get people excited and say, you know what, rather than waiting 3 or 4 months to do a formal audit report, let's just put the topic right out there with the top management and ask people to get behind it and do something, do some analysis. It's a lot faster to get, and certainly the organizations I worked in, to get 100 managing directors focused on a challenge in the next week or two, reading a 5 or 6 page PowerPoint, than waiting for a disastrous audit report to hit the presses after 4 or 5 months of detailed testing. That's where assurance leaders have to sort of pivot and change and go with the flow. Okay. Very quickly, just touching upon the sort of forum. So obviously, as insurance professionals, we interact with, obviously, the formal sense, the CEO, the board, the audit committee, the risk committee, the finance committee. And, when you think about it, you put yourself in their shoes, what do they really value from us as assurance leaders? Well, they kind of want vision, courage, want us to spark conversations and speak up. They want us to be the eyes and ears, right? Particularly with non-executive directors and board members. They're only coming in for meetings, every month, every 2 months, every quarter. And yet they want to have that informed perspective. Just cut to the chase. What have you seen? What worries you? Let me know, right? So that's the role that we have to play, be their eyes and ears. And that requires us to have courage, but also have done a lot of the heavy lifting and thinking before we engage with them. If you think more about executive management, and again, I write this probably written more as an internal auditor, but it could equally apply to a risk function or a compliance function. When you're interacting with management, they want to be challenged, in my sense. They want you to understand their procedures, their controls, their risk understanding, their policies, etc. But they want you to feedback, but they want you to have a certain amount of empathy for them. Like, listen, nobody's perfect. And if you're expecting perfection, you're being a bit unrealistic as a leader, particularly as an internal auditor. So my sense is, from an insurance role, what they're looking for from insurance leaders is to be great sparring partners. And what I mean by that is, if you take the analogy of a professional boxer getting ready for a title fight, they'll spend 6-8 weeks intensive training before that fight to get ready. They'll hire sparring partners who will mimic their opponent. It could be they're going to fight someone who's got a long reach. They could be left-handed, and they could have a great jab. Whatever it is, they hire professionals to help them get ready. So the fight comes along, they win the fight, and it's great. But it's the unsung hero is not just it's the sparring partners who've gotten the fighter ready for the big fight and who help them win. And again, I sense that sort of from an internal auditor or sort of supports assurance function, getting people ready was really important. So again, these all emphasize trust, impact and sort of being a catalyst for positive change in the organization. Finally, I'll just sort of leave you with the sense of sort of leadership traits from an assurance perspective. It's so important that we turn up, we actually are authentic, and we sort of care. I say giving a damn, but we care. You got to tell people you care because it's important, right? You want the business to succeed and thrive. You need to be that great sparring partner, which really, puts you kind of in their corner, right? Which is really important. Of course, you'll still own the pen when you have to write issues and write reports. No one's telling you that you have to bend to whatever management thinks or feels. But it's that connection, that informal connection, and that sense of we're kind of on the same page and on the same team, that's really important. Again, I would say leverage the informal, really, really important. I mean, think about that iceberg picture, going back a few slides. And then when you do have issues, and you're a leader in an assurance function, pivot quickly to providing solutions and try where you can to have some optionality, right? Nobody necessarily likes a one-trick pony, right? So if you've come across an issue or a challenge, think about it, do a lot of the heavy lifting before you engage, and present back opportunities to do things differently. So with that, that's the end of my prepared comments, David. I think we're on to the next poll.
Thank you, Shane. Stay with us as we head into the final session. Before we do that, we'll do our polling question number 4. Polling question number 4 is, we're giving away 3 copies of Brian's ebook. If you would like to enter in our draw, answer yes. So if you can go ahead and do that. And while that's running, let's welcome back Brian and Nikki for our Q&A session. Nancy had to leave for another engagement. We thank her very much for her contribution. And let's see how the poll is coming along. Yes or no? And let's see. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Can you close the poll, please, Kieran? And we have 93% of people responding, asking to be entered in the draw. And with that, Shane, let me hand over to you for our discussion.
Great. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. And again, great to see Brian and Nikki back. So, we covered a wide range of topics in today's webinar, and I think hopefully it's been a great learning experience for everyone participating. But maybe I'll pivot back to you, Brian, right? So one of the topics, obviously, you're a very experienced coach and a very senior executive. We're good friends from Swiss Re days. From a sense of, is coaching is it really an underdeveloped muscle, both at an individual level and a corporate level? Could you give us a sense of how prevalent is coaching among executives, particularly executives who transfer into become good leaders?
I think, Shane, it's a really good question, and I think there are a couple of elements to it. One, I think for any person who's in a leadership role, having somebody that you can talk to, that you trust, to give you feedback on the challenges you're facing, how you're coming through, is just super important. I mean, I think anybody who's on this call who's ever been in a leadership role recognizes it can be sort of a lonely spot to be in. You feel like you're responsible for everything. You feel like you have limited control. You feel tons of pressure. So having somebody to talk to give you that feedback on your performance and how the team is receiving you, your strategies for reaching the team, your strategies for doing your leadership work, super important. That could be through a mentor. That could be through a sponsor in your organization. It can also be through somebody like myself and others who, work with people we don't really know all the time, but we work in a professional capacity to coach and to hopefully help them work on specific, let's say, leadership competencies or approaches to leadership where they feel like, or their organization is telling them, gosh, it's just not as good as it could be. Let's go work on that.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, thanks for that, Brian. Nikki, I'm going to pivot to you a little bit just on one of the questions. And actually the question could apply to both of you, but we'll start with Nikki. There's a famous saying, I believe it's by Peter Drucker, that used to say that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And obviously in sort of high-performing teams, culture is really important. So could you give us a sense, do you agree with that statement, culture eats strategy for breakfast? And, what's the most important part of culture in that sort of high performing team dynamic?
Sorry, I just got mute for the moment. So absolutely, everything is defined by culture. That is why you hear a lot is saying cultural fit, which is very critical. A lot of people underestimate it. I do believe that high performing, you could only build high performing team in a highly collaborative culture. And that culture is driven from the top. I've seen the situation where, for example, all the decisions are being made at the top behind the closed doors. And basically, you just execute the decision which is being made. And in some companies are like that. But to me, if we're building high performance, especially in our world, and we have a lot of young people who want to own things, who want to be decision makers, we need to create culture who allows them to do that. It's a completely different generation from generation where we just had to work hard and that's important. No, it's a generation very different. We want to own decision, we want to drive, we want to have independence. And if you don't have culture like this, you're going to lose people.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Nikki. And Brian, say maybe the same question to you from but your sort of broad leadership experience and coaching experience. Could you talk a little bit more about that cultural dynamic and how important it is?
Sure. So maybe building on Nikki's comments, I think culture is a keystone topic for organizations. And the way I think about this, and I talk about it with senior leaders, is actually culture is what's happening when you're not in the room. So how do people work together? How do they align? How do they collaborate? How do they prioritize when they're not being observed by the most senior leaders? Organizations that have a strong culture are ones where when the senior leader is not in the room, they're driving the right things. They're driving towards growth. They're driving towards accountability. They're driving towards customer service. They're really driving independently towards the overall objectives of the organization. That's a company with a strong culture. And those are companies, I think, organizations that tend to win more than they lose. On the opposite side, if the most senior Apex leaders have to be in the room to get people to do the basics, you've got a pretty weak culture. And chances are there's a great opportunity to really focus on that and work on that and hopefully get better as a group.
Yeah, no, that's really great commentary, Brian. One of the topics I've read, I think I've seen it a few times, is that a lot of people describe culture in their organization of how the employees feel about going to work on a Sunday evening. So how do they feel about the anticipation about Monday morning on a Sunday night? And as you say, you get that culture of are leaders doing the right thing when nobody's looking, right? Are doing the right things when the chief executive or the head of the department is not in the room at the same time. But maybe it also just sticking to culture for a moment. One of the topics that can happen in teams, particularly with a new leader, what happens if you inherit a team that's perhaps underperforming, that's disengaged, that you've got a kind of a poor culture? Could you give some advice to a new leader or someone who's come into a dynamic that feels uncomfortable? And maybe start with you, Nikki. Just I know you've had experience in you talked about high performing teams and how you deal with those sort of challenges, and then also probably pivot to Brian as well.
Sure, Shane. So a lot of people would probably think it's a disadvantage when you come into a new team which is not performing well, but you also have an advantage because this is your opportunity to create a new impression and sometimes to change the way the team works. First of all, and I did talk about this previously, you need to understand what makes individual team members tick. So I would have one to understand the dynamics of the team, and I'll tell you if as a new leader, you're going to try to get to know the team. We will appreciate it. We will tell you everything you need to know, what's working and what's not working. And that's a question you need to ask, because the benefit you have, you don't have the history that we may have with the old leaders. We could tell you, you know what, the old leader micromanaged and everything like that, which you talked about. So collect the information privately, analyze it, assess, and then decide what you want to do next. Create the open forum as well, and this is really how you could change the way the team operates.
No, thanks, Nikki. Brian, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so just building on Nikki's comments, which I fully endorse, I think anytime somebody takes over a new team, a couple of recommendations from me. First of all, diagnose, am I dealing with a burning platform, yes or no? If the business is kind of driving off a cliff or is on fire, you need to move with quite a lot of urgency on a number of topics. Assuming that's not the case, then the thing that you raised, Shane, I would recommend to people, you should spend a lot more time asking than telling. You should not be rushed to decisions about people, team, direction. You should be out there talking, as Nikki said, to the people, asking what's working, what's not, and asking why, but also talk to stakeholders inside the firm, talk to peers, find friends, build. Every little bit of data you get about your team is a mosaic tile. It has a color, but it doesn't really tell you much. Over time, if you can accumulate enough of those tiles, you get a picture. And then you start to say, here's where I think we're going. Here's where I think we're missing. There's also an opportunity to play back that picture to your team, to your peers, to your bosses to say, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm hearing. Do you agree? And once you feel like you're actually dealing with something approaching truth, a clear lens on the challenges, then you can start taking action and you can start moving the team with you towards a different destination, hopefully.
Great. No, thanks for that, Brian. I'm going to pivot to a slightly different topic. I'm conscious we probably only have about 5 or 6 minutes left before we get into the sort of wrap up. But obviously the topic of AI is out there, and AI is looms. The shadow of AI looms across every role and every leadership role and every team globally these days. But if we explore the topic of AI and leadership, how does a leader adopt and adapt to working with AI and yet still retain the sort of characteristics and the behaviors that make them a great leader? I'm just curious to get perspective from both of you. And again, I'm happy to start with you, Brian, and then we'll pivot to Nikki. But yeah, just talk about AI, the dynamic of AI and leadership.
Shane, I'd like to locate AI in a sort of a broader sweep. And that broader sweep is irrespective of when you came into the business world, there was something in the environment that was disruptive. Once upon a time, that disruption felt like automation. Once upon a time, that disruption felt like outsourcing, nearshoring, offshoring. There's always something in terms of something which is unsettling the business environment, of which AI is the most recent, let's say, addition. I think leaders have an obligation. Again, part of what your role is to tell the story. So telling the story here says, well, look, AI is a new thing on the scene. We're going to spend some time understanding it, but we're also going to spend some time understanding how we can use it as a tool to get better at our craft, to get better at the thing we do, to get better at delivering services to our clients, to get better at precision. There's a lot of things we can use it to get better. Of course, people are going to come back and say, or at least think, God, this thing is going to eliminate my job. I'm screwed. But part of your job as a leader is to, again, locate it inside of a context, which is business is always changing. There's always a wolf at the door. And our job is, as a group of leaders, is to make sure our organization is fit for purpose to deal with that particular wolf, knowing its cousin is coming next week. So that's what I would encourage people to think about. It is a continuum of change that AI is a part of. It's not the only change that businesses have ever had to come to grips with. Leaders own the responsibility for that interpretation.
Thank you for that, Brian. And Nikki, from your perspective, AI and the leadership dynamic. What are your thoughts?
I would say inspire by example. I spent some time at Amazon where it was about automation. So a lot of time I tell my team, the people who will implement AI, who could implement AI and make it happen, it's you. So let's identify the situation when you're frustrated, you're spending too much time, Excel spreadsheet. How could we implement visualization tool? And I'm here to help. For example, the other day I said someone was trying to come up with visualization tool. I said Power BI or Tableau. Why don't we get your license and do that, right? Or some automating policies and procedures, putting all the policies, procedures with the accounting policy, operational procedures into some AI tool. I think the most important thing for me from the leadership perspective is to inspire the team to have this process improvement mindset versus doing it myself, to make sure I make them think how we could make their life easier and more innovative.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate both of your comments, and I would certainly add that I think it's AI is out there. It's incumbent upon anyone that thinks they are a leader to really embrace that technology. It's okay to sort of go into the unknown, but if you embrace it as a leader and you sort of encourage your team members to become expert at it and to sort of share ideas and perspectives and know-how, again, it's one of those shared objectives that I think really propels a team to be a high-performing team. Again, one of the things I've seen is that sometimes like experienced managers and leaders, to some extent, obviously, they have AI. They have a lot of ideas and thoughts, and when you sort of use tools like GPT and some of the other tools that are out there, you actually have a good sense of what you're looking for, but you maybe in the past weren't able to quite do it. Now it's sort of being served back to you. So I actually think it's a bit of an adapt or die moment for leaders, but also for certain functions. I mean, again, I have a lot of experience in internal audit functions, and every internal audit function, like most other teams, are absolutely investing heavily in AI to sort of transform their work, make it more efficient, focus on things that really matter. And I think it's just again, it's the current unsettling topic as Brian described. But again, its cousin is sort of just around the corner, right? So whatever AI 2.0 will be. With that, I'm just conscious of time, David. So I think it's probably time that we wrap up. But maybe I'll just ask sort of Brian and Nikki just for a couple of words and sort of final, like just 30 seconds, just key takeaways you'd want people to take away from today's webinar.
So if I go, I just jump in there, Shane. So I think hopefully what people have heard is some good information about how to think about leadership as a craft and some specific things in terms of, let's say, one's leadership role in terms of setting culture, setting expectations. And the thing I would just like to, again, remind people of, I think some of the best leaders in the world are the ones who ask more than they tell, who really engage the human beings working for them and pull those people along through their engagement. And as Nikki said earlier, inspiring them.
I would echo Brian as well, because as a leader, you set the tone for your team's success. And again, as I mentioned before, without our teams, we cannot really achieve a lot. And always remember that. Set the culture for the team to be successful, because it is the most important role for you as a leader.
That's great. And I would probably just add, accentuate the informal, particularly if you're an assurance leader. Play to the informal sense to build trust and relationships, and that will only make your formal work even stronger and connecting better with your clients. With that, we'll go to the final poll and to David for final remarks.
Yeah, we're at time, but if you've got a few minutes, let's stay on for the final poll. Sorry we ran a little long there. The final poll is, I am focused on enhancing my leadership skills. Do you agree, disagree, or don't know? And while you're answering the poll, let me say a big thank you to our presenters and to you, our attendees. Before you exit, please fill in the feedback survey available on screen. We also look forward to you joining us at our next event on July the 17th, where we will be looking at redoing one of the most popular webinars we have ever done, which is on becoming a US CPA if your institute has an MRA with AICPA and NASBA. We did the original almost 5 years ago, after South Africa got their MRA, and this time we're covering the same ground but updating it to reflect the current program. And now, let's close the poll. And the results are 99% agreeing. And with that, thank you all and goodbye.